So what are you going to do about it? You're not going to engage in a half-hour exercise bout every couple of hours over the course of the day. But importantly, you can do just little bouts of activity, and it has a massive impact. So this study, they looked at individuals who broke their sitting time up over the course of the day. And I'm not going to say by how much yet, right? But over the course of the day, they broke it up by just a couple of minutes of activity. And later on we can discuss what type of activity that might be. And these are just a couple of the parameters that I pulled out of this paper that they examined. There's other metabolic risk markers as well. But in the individuals that had the most amount of breaks in sedentary time, their waist circumference was 6 centimetres lower than individuals who had pretty much no breaks in their sedentary time over the course of the day. And we can see the glucose response to a glucose challenge is also better the more you break up your sitting time. Okay. So that then primes someone to do an experimental study. I'll talk you through this in a second. I'm going to get a drink. How are we doing on the timer?
Just 16 minutes.
All right.
14 minutes to go.
So this study on the left, and this figure came from a study that was published in 2012. Okay, so only 3 years ago. It was the first study that got some individuals into a laboratory and actually tightly controlled what they did over a period of 6 hours. This was. But I'll talk you through briefly what they did here. Okay, so in the first couple of hours, I got them in, sat them down, and after 2 hours, they fed them a drink. It was 75 grams carbohydrate and 50 grams of fat, like a mixed milkshake and glucose load. Then what they did was observe them over the next 5 hours. They split them into 3 different conditions here. So the blue line, is uninterrupted sitting. So they basically were told, sit there, limit your movement. Right, and they've done stuff like read books, work on a laptop, but minimise your movement, only getting up to go to the loo basically. In the other 2 conditions, they performed 2 minutes of walking every 20 minutes over that 5-hour period. They did that either at a light intensity, which in this study was 3.2 kilometres per hour, or a moderate intensity, which ranged between 6.5 to 8 kilometres per hour. Right. And what you can see there, with the conditions where they use activity breaks, actually the lines are very, very similar. So what they observed is that the glucose response here, it didn't matter whether you'd done moderate intensity or light intensity walking. Right, as long as you broke up your sitting time, and with these regular short activity bouts, your glucose could be suppressed over the course of 5 hours. And that meant actually 24% lower glucose response in that 5 hours. And that was matched by a 31% reduction in insulin as well over those 5 hours. So that was really interesting data that many researchers got hold of for, well, that's real surprising. Can we look at other ways, other bout durations, other frequency of bouts in terms of breaking up someone's sitting time and see if it's effective? This study was published only last year, and they didn't look at breaking up sitting time, but they wanted to look at how standing could be used instead. So it was standing replacing sitting time. And they observed, I think it's some estate agents. They got into an office of an estate agents. They agreed to take part in this study, and on 2 separate afternoons, they observed these office workers either sat at their desk as normal, or on the other afternoon, they put in a load of standing desks. Okay, so they were stood up during their time instead. Right, and in the blue line, so that's the seated afternoon. Again, we're looking at glucose. You can see over the course of the day, this glucose response is a lot higher compared to when they were standing. Right, and interestingly, even though they were standing, they didn't actually move away from their desk any more than when they had their normal seated desks. So the researchers knew that this response was just from them standing at their desk. So that could be a potentially really easy practical way of impacting on a lot of people in the country, possibly. Pretty much nearly halved glucose response over the course of that afternoon. Okay. So, just to sum up what we've discussed so far, it's pretty clear now, and it's widely accepted that high amounts of sedentary time or sitting increases risk of disease and mortality. Breaking up sitting time lowers disease risk. So what we now need to consider is how can we achieve that practically in the real world? That's quite a tough question to ask. And there's a lot of studies now coming out that are looking at different protocols or different ways, strategies to break up sitting time. And I'll just give you a couple of examples of laboratory experiments that I've got my research group doing at the moment, just here in our labs. So we copied, in a way, this study here. Right. And here you can start to decipher what might be a good way to break up sitting time, what might not. We use exactly the same protocol as this study by David Dunstan, his name was. Okay. And we use the uninterrupted sitting protocol, we use the sitting and light intensity walking protocol, but instead of doing a moderate intensity breaks protocol as well, we decided what's going to happen if you get an individual just to stand for those 2 minutes every 20 minutes. Okay. Because based on this, we thought that might work, might be effective. But actually, we found that standing still for 2 minutes every 20 minutes isn't actually effective, any more effective than uninterrupted sitting. Which was quite an interesting finding to us. But that then asks questions, and you then go and design another study to ask some different questions. And I suppose it also would be important to know here the type of people that they actually done these studies on. Okay, so in this study that I presented up here, these guys were older adults, so they were, remember, 55 to 65 years old, and they were overweight or obese as well. So we saw quite a big reduction here in their glucose response over that time period. A study that I done last year, we got physically active, healthy males in. Okay, so like some of you guys out here, almost you guys, physically active. So they're all doing more than 150 minutes per week. And some of them were actually doing a lot more than that. Some of them were quite good standard rugby players, a couple of them. And even in those individuals, we showed that breaking up sitting time with light intensity walking suppressed their glucose levels quite a bit. And there's a number of studies now being published in different types of population subgroups. And I think I've only come across one or two over the last few years that have showed that their breaking up sitting protocol hasn't been effective. So I think that's quite important, so we can affect all of these different populations using pretty much the same strategy. Okay, quite important.